The elephant lay low in the earth, its massive body pressed awkwardly against the sloped walls of a ditch carved by the season's heavy rains. Dust clung to its skin, and shallow breaths rose and fell from its heaving chest, each one weaker than the last. The sound was faint, more a whisper than the full strength of a creature meant to roam free. Above, branches shifted in the breeze, but the forest itself seemed still, as if waiting for the weight of the moment to reveal itself. The ranger had not expected silence of this kind. Usually, elephants carried with them a presence that filled the landscape. Their rumbling calls, the steady thud of their feet, the restless movement of trunks and ears. But here, in this carved-out hollow, there was no such sound. Only the faint moan of breath, uneven and weary, told him that life still lingered. He stepped carefully closer, the crunch of dry soil under his boots sounding far too loud against the hush. His eyes studied the slope, steep, with loose clay breaking under its own weight. No creature of such size could climb it without help. The animal shifted slightly, its trunk dragging against the dirt as if searching for something firm to hold. The gesture was weak, more instinct than choice. The ranger paused a few paces away, lowering himself to crouch at the rim. From this angle he could see the tremor in her flank, the strain in the ribs as she pulled another breath into tired lungs. Her eyes, half-lidded, flickered once in his direction before sliding shut again. The ditch was not deep by human measure, but it was deep enough to become a prison for a creature of such mass. Likely she had slipped while foraging, drawn by the moisture pooled at the bottom after weeks of heat. The slope had crumbled, and the earth had closed around her. Hours, perhaps even a full day, might have passed since then. The soil around her body was stamped with restless marks where she had tried and failed to rise. Each attempt must have stolen more of her strength until stillness became her only choice. The ranger removed his hat, the weight of the sight pressing into his chest. He had seen animals in distress before, antelope tangled in wire, buffalo slowed by old wounds, but the quiet of this moment was heavier. An elephant was not meant to look small, yet here, confined in the narrow ditch, she seemed reduced, diminished by the earth itself. A low groan escaped her, deep and guttural, carrying the fatigue of her struggle. The sound was enough to draw him down the slope a little, testing the soil beneath his boots. He stopped when the clay crumbled under his step, unwilling to cause a slide that might bury her further. His hand reached out instinctively, palm open in a calming gesture. "It's okay, girl," he whispered, the words barely above the wind. Her ear twitched just once at the sound. The movement was faint, but it carried a message. She was aware, still tethered to the world outside her. Exhaustion. That was enough. The ranger rose again, scanning the surrounding land. Trees pressed close on one side, their roots twisting down into the clay. On the other, the earth opened into a clearing where light pooled across the ground. He imagined the path she must have taken, imagined the moment when her footing gave way, and how sudden the silence that followed. Sweat dampened his shirt as he considered the problem. To approach her without care could cause panic. To leave her too long could mean her strength fading past return. Time balanced sharply between them. He would need help, tools, ropes, perhaps even the force of another vehicle, but in this first moment, what mattered most was that she was not alone. He remained, watching her breath rise and fall, speaking only in the quietest tones when she stirred. The elephant's trunk lifted once more, slow and uncertain, brushing against the clay wall before falling back against her chest. Dust puffed lightly into the air, the particles catching the slant of sunlight. She gave a faint rumble, a sound so soft it could have been mistaken for the shifting of earth. Yet to him it was a sign, a voice, however tired, refusing to be swallowed by silence. He stayed there, rooted to the edge of the ditch, as the forest around them grew heavy with the heat of midday. Birds had stilled their songs, and even the wind seemed cautious. Only the shallow rhythm of the elephant's breathing moved the moment forward. What began as discovery now pressed into urgency. The stillness in the earth was not simply quiet. It was a plea, hidden beneath dust and exhaustion waiting for someone to answer. The ranger lingered for a long moment on the edge of the ditch, his breath steadying against the silence that pressed in around him. The elephant's shallow movements, the rise and fall of her chest drew his attention again and again. Each shift seemed uncertain, as if the effort to breathe weighed nearly as much as her body itself. He knew that waiting too long could cost her more than strength, yet rushing forward without care could startle her into panic. Balance, as always in the wild, would be found in patience. He eased one step down the slope, his boots pressing carefully against the looser clay. The elephant's ear flicked once at the sound, her half-closed eyes opening just a fraction to follow his slow approach. He stopped there, choosing not to close the space too quickly. His hands remained visible, palms lowered toward the earth, signaling calm in the only language he could offer. "Easy now," he whispered, his voice a quiet thread carried on the breeze. The elephant's trunk lifted slightly from the dirt, trembling with the strain of the movement. It extended only a short distance before falling back with a muted thud, dust rising gently into the light. Her body told its story without words, exhaustion layered over fear, instinct urging her to rise while her strength refused to answer. Her flank quivered, and her breathing came faster at his nearness, the soft rumble of distress vibrating faintly through the ground. The ranger paused again, letting the silence lengthen until her breathing steadied to its earlier rhythm. Then, with slow movements, he began clearing the earth nearest her. Branches and loose clumps of soil had gathered where the rains had carved the ditch, creating obstacles that trapped her further. With his hands and a small spade from his pack, he worked steadily, removing what weight he could from the ground around her. Each motion was deliberate, unhurried, so the sound of shifting soil would not carry the threat of sudden danger. She watched him through the dim slit of one eye, the great orb glistening with a thin film of dust and fatigue. When a branch cracked beneath his hand, she flinched, her leg shifting sharply as if to brace for impact. He stilled instantly, his body held quiet until her trembling subsided. Only then did he crouch lower, gathering the fallen wood away piece by piece. The gesture was not enough to free her yet, but it was a beginning, a signal that the world outside the ditch still offered room for hope. Time passed slowly as he worked. The sun climbed higher, pressing heat into the air, and sweat ran down his back in thin streams. Still he kept at the task, clearing the ditch's edge, loosening soil where it pressed too tightly against her body. Dust clung to his arms, his nails filled with clay, but the rhythm of the work gave him calm. Every few minutes he stopped, eyes turning to her chest to confirm the steady pulse of breath. Each exhale brought relief. Each inhale reminded him that her will had not yet broken. At one point her trunk shifted again, stretching weakly toward him. It hovered just above the ground, trembling with the effort. For a fleeting instant it brushed against the soil he had cleared, tracing the fresh line of space. The ranger's chest tightened at the sight. She had noticed, however faintly, the change in her surroundings. She understood that something was being done. He lowered his hand near the earth but did not reach out, letting her scent him on the air if she wished. The trunk faltered, then sank back onto her chest, a soft huff leaving her lungs. The ditch was wide, and he could not yet imagine how he would bring her up its steep slope. That problem loomed larger with every glance at the clay walls. But this moment was not about the climb. This was about giving her air, giving her the chance to gather what little strength remained. Clearing the space was as much a gesture of reassurance as it was a practical step. She needed to sense calm, to feel that the world beyond the ditch had not abandoned her. "Almost there," he murmured once, his voice catching in the quiet. The words were not for meaning, but for rhythm, a sound softer than the cries of birds above them. The elephant shifted her ears at the sound, folding and unfolding them slowly. When at last he straightened, the space around her body looked changed. The tangled branches were gone, the soil looser, the edges freer than before. She was still pinned by fatigue, her body refusing to rise, but the suffocating press of earth had eased. She gave a low rumble then, deeper than her earlier groans. It carried a note of tired acknowledgement, a vibration that stirred through the hollow and into the air. The ranger stepped back, his boots pressing firm against the cleared edge. He let his gaze rest on her without movement, allowing her to settle again. The bond between them was not trust yet, but something fragile, unspoken, and new. The forest around them seemed to open slightly, its silence no longer so heavy. For the first time since he found her, there was a space not only in the soil, but in the moment, a space where hope could live. The sun had shifted higher, and with it the light pooled harshly along the rim of the ditch. The ranger had worked for hours now, and at last help had come. A small team moved quietly into place, their voices low, their gestures measured. They carried ropes and tools, but no loud movements disturbed the air. They knew the weight of the moment rested not on force, but on patience and care. The elephant still lay in the hollow, her breaths shallow yet steady, her body twitching with exhaustion. Dust streaked her hide, and her eyes blinked heavily as though each opening was a test of strength. The ranger stepped closer, his hand resting briefly on the clay wall as he considered her position. The others stood back until he gave the smallest nod. Together they lowered ropes, thick and coarse, looping them carefully around her broad shoulders and behind her front legs. The elephant rumbled faintly, a note of confusion carrying through the hollow. Her trunk shifted weakly, brushing the earth as though searching for escape. The men paused, waiting for her breathing to settle again before tightening the lines. When the first pull came, it was gentle, more suggestion than command. The ropes tightened with a creak, and the elephant groaned in response. She pressed her weight against the soil, her forelegs bracing as if to lift. For a brief moment her massive frame shifted upward, her chest rising from the ground, dust sliding down her flank. But the strength did not hold. With a heavy thud, she sank back into the hollow, a cloud of powder rising around her. The men released tension immediately, letting the ropes slacken. The ranger crouched low at the edge, his eyes steady on her. "You're almost there," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. She stirred at the sound, her ear twitching once, her trunk curling in a tired arc before collapsing again. The bond was fragile, but it carried enough weight to keep the rhythm of effort alive. Minutes later, they tried again. The ropes drew taut, and this time she pushed harder, her hind legs kicking against the clay for purchase. Her body rose half a meter, the ditch echoing with the scrape of her strength. But her footing gave way, the soil crumbling under her weight, and she fell once more. The ground shook with the impact, a dull vibration running through the roots above. She lay still for a long moment, dust settling on her sides, her chest heaving with rapid breaths. The men waited in silence, their tools idle in their hands. None dared press her too quickly. They knew each attempt drained what little reserves she still carried. The ranger's gaze never left her. He counted the breaths, measured the pauses, and listened for the faintest rumble of life still holding beneath the exhaustion. When her trunk shifted again, tapping faintly against the wall, he knew she was ready to try once more. This time the pull was steadier, firmer, the ropes pressing into her skin but guiding rather than dragging. She responded with a groan, the sound carrying deeper than before, and slowly she rose. The muscles along her shoulders bunched beneath her hide, trembling under the strain. For a few breaths she held herself half-standing, her eyes wide with effort, ears fanning slowly as though balancing her body in air. Hope surged through the watching men. And then again the strength faltered. She dropped, dust exploding around her in a choking cloud, her body slumping against the earth. The ranger stepped forward, crouching at the rim. His voice came again, low and steady. "It's okay, girl." His words were not force but reassurance, a reminder that this was not her battle alone. She rumbled faintly in return, a sound so soft it might have been mistaken for the earth shifting. They paused longer now. The air grew heavy, the heat thick against skin, yet no one moved impatiently. The elephant's body rose and fell in tired rhythm, and after a time, her trunk lifted once more. The ranger saw it as a sign. He nodded to the men, and once again they leaned into the ropes, coaxing her upward. This attempt was different. Though trembling, she found a steadier footing. Her hind legs pressed hard into the clay, her front shoulders lifted with the guidance of the ropes. Inch by inch she rose, her massive frame shuddering with the weight of her own body. Dust streamed down her hide, filling the hollow with a haze. The sound of ropes creaking, men straining, and her deep rumbling breath merged into one rhythm. But the effort was too much. After a final heave she collapsed again, her body striking the soil with a resonant thud. The hollow filled with silence, broken only by her heavy panting. Yet even in failure, something had changed. She had risen higher than before, held herself longer. Her will was not broken. The battle continued. The ranger wiped dust from his brow, his eyes fixed on her still form. He could see the tremors still running along her sides, the faint lift of her ribs with every struggling breath. Though she lay defeated for now, he sensed resilience pulsing, beneath the exhaustion. The rhythm of effort and rest had taken hold, a pattern as old as survival itself. In the quiet that followed, the forest seemed to lean closer. The air carried no triumph yet, but it carried something just as vital: persistence. What unfolded here was not a single act of rescue, but a slow, steady dance of trust and endurance, where each collapse led not to surrender, but to another chance to rise. The air hung heavy with dust and silence, the echo of the elephant's last collapse still trembling in the ground. The men stood back, giving her time, their shoulders bowed not with defeat, but with patience. The ranger watched her sides lift and fall, the rhythm uneven but unbroken. Hours had stretched into the kind of waiting that feels endless, yet no one spoke of leaving. There was something in the weight of her effort that commanded stillness, something that told them she was not done. She stirred again, her trunk dragging across the dirt with weary intent. The ropes hung slack around her, waiting for another attempt. Her ears lifted faintly, folding and unfolding as if testing the air. Then came a sound, low, deep, and rumbling, that vibrated through the ditch. It was not panic, not the groan of collapse, but a tone that carried defiance against exhaustion. The ranger straightened at once, his eyes fixed on her as she shifted her weight beneath her. The ropes tightened gently as the team leaned in once more. With deliberate force she pressed against the clay, her front legs pushing forward, her hindquarters straining for purchase. The ground shook beneath the effort, dust sliding down the walls in small cascades. Her body rose higher than before, her massive shoulders clearing the earth's grip. Tremors ran through her muscles, her skin rippling with strain, yet she did not falter this time. Inch by inch she stood, until her body towered above the ditch once more, trembling but upright. For a heartbeat the forest seemed to stop, every sound stilled beneath the weight of that moment. The long fight distilled into one towering silhouette against the sun. She swayed on her legs, her ears spreading wide for balance, her trunk curling weakly toward the ground as if steadying herself on the air. The ranger exhaled, his voice soft, steady, and full of quiet relief. "You made it." She stood for several breaths, her body shuddering but holding. Dust clung to her flanks, streaked dark with sweat and soil. The ropes fell loose and were pulled gently away, leaving her free at last. She gave a long exhale, the sound rolling low and tired through the clearing. Her chest expanded as though filling fully with air for the first time since her fall. The ranger thought the moment complete. Survival won after a day's desperate struggle. But then the undergrowth at the edge of the thicket stirred. Leaves shivered, branches parted, and from the shadows emerged something small, unsteady on its legs. A calf. No. Taller than the ranger's shoulder, stepped hesitantly into the light. Its ears flapped awkwardly, its trunk curling and uncurling in anxious rhythm as it gave a faint, high-pitched cry. The men froze in silence. Until that instant, none had known. The great elephant had not been fighting for herself alone. Every push, every collapse, every tremor of strength had carried another life folded quietly in the forest's edge. The calf bleated again, the sound sharp with fear and longing, and the mother turned at once. Her trunk lifted, extending toward the small figure with sudden urgency. She took a step forward, unsteady but purposeful. Her legs wobbled beneath her weight, but the sight of the calf seemed to lend her a steadier force. She rumbled low, a sound that vibrated through the clearing, and the calf answered with another call, quick and eager. The distance between them closed as the calf hurried forward, stumbling slightly on the uneven ground until at last it pressed against her towering frame. The mother lowered her trunk, brushing it over the calf's back in slow, deliberate strokes. Dust shifted from her skin onto the calf's hide, marking it with her scent. The calf pressed close, nudging against her, its small body trembling with both fear and relief. She responded with a rumble so deep it seemed to shake the air itself, a sound of recognition, reassurance, and reunion. The ranger's throat tightened as he watched. What had seemed like the struggle of one life was revealed as the protection of two. The calf had hidden, waiting silently while its mother fought for breath, for strength, for freedom. Now, with her standing again, the bond between them lit the clearing with a force no rope or hand could create. The men stepped back further, lowering their eyes and tools. The rescue no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the space between mother and calf, to the quiet miracle that had unfolded from struggle. The ranger turned slightly, his gaze lingering but respectful, giving them distance in their reunion. The mother swayed on her feet, still trembling from exhaustion, but she did not yield. Her trunk stayed low, curling protectively around the calf's back, guiding it close as though drawing strength from its presence. The calf, emboldened by her touch, let out another cry, not of fear this time, but of need, answered instantly by her rumble. The forest, silent for so long, seemed to breathe again. Birds called softly from the branches, leaves rustled in the heat, and the distant hum of insects returned. The air that had been tense with strain now carried the softer rhythm of renewal. The ranger let the scene etch itself quietly into memory. He knew the struggle was not fully over. Her body still shook with fatigue, and their journey back into the wild would be slow. Yet the miracle had already happened. The will to rise had brought her back from the edge, and in doing so, it had returned her to the calf, who depended on her. She shifted once more, steadying herself, and together they stood in the dappled light, mother and young pressed close. Dust floated gently around them, lit by the late sun, settling into the earth as if to seal the moment in place. The mother elephant stood unsteadily, her body still marked by the long battle in the ditch. Dust clung to her hide, streaks of soil tracing the lines of muscle that had trembled for hours under the strain of escape. Yet beside her now pressed the calf, small and vulnerable, leaning close against her towering side. The calf's trunk coiled upward, brushing her chest in restless motions, as if reassuring itself that she was truly there. She lowered her own trunk in reply, looping it gently around the calf's back, the touch slow, deliberate, and deeply rooted in an ancient rhythm of comfort. The ranger stepped quietly away, placing more distance between himself and the pair. His boots sank softly into the soil, but he made no effort to hide the sound. The elephants no longer reacted sharply. Their world had closed into the narrow circle of mother and young. He stood still at the edge of the clearing, his arms loose at his sides, his face heavy with sweat and dust, but lightened by the sight before him. He had given what he could. The rest belonged to them alone. The calf moved first, circling clumsily around its mother's front legs, bumping into her with its small body. Its ears flapped awkwardly, its steps uncertain as though every piece of ground carried new questions. The mother steadied herself and shifted to block the calf from the deeper slope, guiding it instead toward the line of trees where safety waited. Her legs trembled with each step, but the will that had carried her from the pit carried her still. The forest seemed to open for them as they moved forward. Shafts of late sunlight filtered through the canopy, painting the dust in golden streams. The calf paused often, turning its small trunk toward the ranger, then back toward its mother. The man did not move. He only lowered his head slightly, acknowledging the glance but offering no intrusion. The calf pressed back against her again, and she answered with a low, rumbling vibration that traveled through the ground itself. Each step was slow, yet steady. The mother lifted her head higher now, her ears spreading wide as she drew strength from the closeness of her calf. Though exhaustion still bent her form, her stride grew firmer with every pace. The ropes, the tools, the hollow where she had nearly been lost, all of it fell behind them. Ahead lay only the dense green of the thicket, where roots twisted deep and shadows pooled soft against the earth. The ranger let out a breath he had been holding for longer than he realized. One of the men beside him murmured softly, "She's going home now." The ranger gave a small nod, though his eyes never left the pair. He felt no need for words. The silence itself carried more meaning than any voice could frame. The calf stumbled once on a root, collapsing briefly to its knees. It gave a startled cry, thin and high, the sound cutting across the still air. The mother turned at once, her trunk curling tightly around the calf's side, lifting and steadying it until it found its footing again. She stood close until the calf quieted, brushing its back with a steady rhythm. Only when it moved forward with renewed confidence did she continue. The ranger felt the moment as a quiet echo inside himself, the reminder that her strength had not only saved her own life, but safeguarded the smaller, fragile one that followed her steps. The struggle had not been hers alone, and the outcome had been more than survival. It had become renewal. They reached the line of trees, and the forest seemed to swallow them gently. Branches closed around their forms, leaves rustling faintly in the late afternoon air. The calf gave one final cry, softer this time, and the sound was answered by her low rumble, fading as they moved deeper into the green. Dust drifted in their wake, settling slowly into the grass and earth. The ranger stood still, his hands resting loosely on his belt, his chest rising with a long breath. He did not follow. His place was not among them now. He remained where he was, the image of mother and calf etched into memory, two silhouettes moving back into the vast embrace of the forest. The men around him were quiet as well, each understanding that the ending required no gesture, no sound. The last glimpse came as the sun dipped lower, catching the curve of her back and the flick of the calf's ears before both shapes melted into shadow. The clearing emptied, leaving only the slow hum of insects and the rustle of leaves stirred by the wind. The ditch behind them lay silent, its walls scarred by the struggle, yet no longer a place of despair. The ranger turned finally, his steps unhurried, his shoulders eased. The rescue had ended, but its weight lingered, not in tools or ropes, but in the quiet knowledge of life reclaimed. The forest closed around him, too, its sounds returning, its breath steady once more, and as the evening light stretched across the land, the air felt changed. Lighter, calmer, carrying with it the quiet grace of survival. Somewhere in the distance, a deep rumble answered a smaller call, and the sound slipped into the fading day like a promise.